I'd like to start off by saying that I don't have a fucking clue why I'm posting this on X, or really at all. Maybe I'm afraid of dying, or something. The events described in this story happened a month and a half ago in Shenandoah, West Virginia. Although I typed this up about 2 weeks ago, I just haven't really had the guts to post this until what happened yesterday. The story starts in late September, when my family went to go visit our relatives, who invited us to celebrate one of them getting like $2,000 in some scratch-off lottery thing. They live in this really fucking shitty part of Shenandoah that people from Charlestown, Shepherdstown, and Ranson, which is basically the least rednecky part of West Virginia, like to call squalor holler. It's way up on the mountain and exactly like how everyone pictures it when they hear about it. Nothing but ramshackle shacks, rusty-ass rebuilt trailers, everything fucking covered in decades-old Christmas decorations because they're all too busy being smelly rednecks to ever clean up. Real deliverance shit. Just no rivers or canoes. The relatives we are visiting are absolutely confirmed inbreeders, all cousins fucking each other. We don't refer to them as aunt, uncle, whatever, just relatives. Not terrible people or anything, just absolutely cartoonish, depressing, hillbilly stereotypes. So anyway, we're up here in this godforsaken trailer. It sucks. There's like 8 of them, plus me, my dad, my mom, and my sister. About 2 hours in, my mom takes my cell phone so that I can focus on the family time together. Which is bullshit. All we did the whole time was eat TV dinners and be forced to watch NASCAR and shit. After like 6 hours of this shit, about 10 minutes before we're supposed to leave, it starts raining. We know how treacherous the roads can be up on the mountain, so we decide to wait for the rain to die down. Flash forward 2 hours later, it's fucking dark as hell. 10 o'clock and there's a flood warning for the area. I have my phone back by this time. No reception though, of course. I'm playing Tetris and Texas Hold'em and stuff when suddenly I hear my dad start losing his shit in the next room. I walk over and it turns out that they let slip that they buried their kid, Thomas, outside and apparently were afraid the rain would wash up his body or some other horseshit. The kid was like 6. He was attacked by a dog, and they never called the cops. Just fucking buried him like he was a family pet. My dad's flipping his shit, and rightfully so, because, you know, we live in the 21st century and all. So our relatives all say they'll sort it out in the morning. My parents tell me and my sister to stay in the same room as them during the night, and we do. None of us really suspected that they'd killed Thomas or anything, since they're really peaceful. They didn't even own any guns aside from this one old-timey double-barrel shotgun they had on the mantle. Nevertheless, we were creeped the fuck out and intended to call the cops in the morning once we got to town. So it was like 3 in the morning. I couldn't sleep. Power had gone out for the 5th time or so, and I'm not able to charge my dead phone. Worst part is, I could see Thomas's little grave right outside the window, like cross on it and everything. And I assumed the kid couldn't have been buried deep at all since they were so worried about him just washing up out of the grave. So I was just fixated on it, kept being drawn to looking out the window, and then I saw the worst fucking thing in my life. Something was creeping through the trees towards the house. I stared at it for a while, but couldn't get a good look at it since it was raining and the brush was so thick. For a few minutes, I assumed it was 2 really pale horses, kind of ambling through the woods side by side, but then it walked into the moonlight, and I saw that it was all one thing, like a kind of human torso, but wider. It finally stepped into full view, and I saw that it had something like 6 legs, kind of somewhere between a beetle's legs and a horse's legs. 2 arms, right where someone would normally have them, but they were about half a foot longer than a normal man's arms. It had a bald head, but the face looked like some sort of fucking bizarre masquerade ball kind of mask. This fucking clenched up, furrowed forehead, and a nose that looked sort of like a crow's or a raven's beak. It didn't have any eyes, either. Just like the depressions where eyes would go, it looked like it had a human mouth underneath its proboscis. What still strikes me to this day is that it seemed to have a penis too, like right on the abdomen where a normal person's dick would be. The thing moved sort of gracefully, and made these soft thumping noises when it moved. It must have been like 7, 8 feet tall, but sounded like it weighed only like 150 pounds at most. Starts walking towards Thomas's grave, and then I finally snapped out of whatever trance I was in and just screamed. My mom is the first to wake up, and I tell her to look out the window. She rushes over, and doesn't really seem to understand what she's looking at. After a minute, though, the thing bends down and starts pawing at the grave with its hands. My dad and Jasper rush in, and Jasper just fucking loses his shit, screams like a little girl, runs back out of the room, yelling for his father, yelling,
"It's outside! It came, and it's outside!"
I look back and see the thing is digging furiously at the ground, kicking up huge mounds of dirt. I hear these sounds of feet running around the house. I think they're looking for the shotgun. The thing reaches into the hole and grabs up what I assume was Thomas's body by the leg in one hand. The thing kind of gallops back into the woods, snapping all these branches and shit, and that's when I hear it. A kid crying. The sound of a child sobbing and crying from the direction that the thing took off in. We left as soon as the rain let up, at like 5 a.m. I don't even think we told anyone at the house, drove straight back to Ranson, only stopping for gas. No one said a word to each other. My family refuses to speak about what happened. I tried to bring it up once, just to make sure it was real. My dad told me to shut the fuck up, so I did. I typed this up about 3 weeks after it happened, but just saved it to a notepad file and left it alone. Never mentioned it to any of my friends or anything. Just tried to erase it from my mind by getting absolutely fucked up drunk whenever my thoughts lingered on it. It mostly worked. Up until yesterday. See, I work at this gas station in Ranson from 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. I work the register, keep the place clean, and take out the trash. Yesterday, when I was bringing the trash bags over to the back of the building for the dude in the morning to take care of, I heard what I had assumed to be some junkie fucking around in the dumpster. I yelled at whoever it was a couple of times to get the hell out before I called the cops. But as I walked towards the source of the noise, I suddenly heard those same footsteps. That soft thump, thump. Hooves or feet, or whatever the hell they were. I turned right around and went back into the store and hid behind the counter. I look over at the outside security monitor and see the same kind of movement from just off screen. Something huge casting a shadow and moving. Catch a glimpse of, I don't know, an elbow or something, a pale limb darting in and out of view. It had to have been the same thing. I waited for it to leave, and after a while, it did. I woke up behind the counter at 6 a.m. this morning to my manager giving me this fucking look like I'm a drug addict or something. I went home, typed the rest of this up, and that's about it. I've always had an overactive imagination. I'm an artist, and I was diagnosed with ADHD as a child. Never medicated, though. So my mind was constantly everywhere, and I was always drawing and fucking around as a kid. My imagination would do terrible things to me sometimes, probably a result of watching horror movies at a young age. Scary shit lurking around every corner, but on one occasion, I knew it wasn't just my imagination. I was in 6th grade at the time, probably 12 or so. And I lived in a small, small town, off of a major highway. Like, seriously small. The only major thing in this town burnt to hell 20 years ago. Then a kid died in the high school, so it was condemned. The only shit here was a cemetery, lake, post office, gas station. All in about 4 blocks of town. Another strange thing about this town is the fact that in the early 90s it was booming. Now it was a dusty, literal ghost town with about 40 people living here. People who never spoke or went outside. The only other kids were my best friends, and there were only 3 of us. And every morning we walked together to the bus stop, and none of us spoke on most mornings. One morning it was more foggy than usual, but I remember it was cold and a little misty outside. My uncle, who is now deceased, grew up here, and he always told me fucked up stories about this town. He told me to watch myself. Strange shit was always going on here. But he was kind of a loony, so I didn't worry about most times. This morning, though, this morning felt off. I wasn't too stressed because I knew the others would be walking up soon enough, and when they didn't, I started freaking out. And then I stood alone at the bus stop. My imagination started going wild. I was in the middle of imagining a set of eyes in the mist, when from about 10 feet away from me to the left, I remember seeing something walking. This was absolutely real. I remember every detail. It was a man, in shape and stature, but the way it walked seriously makes my bones numb. Slow and rhythmic, like it was floating. My 12-year-old eyes bulged out of my skull, and I remember freezing in terror. Good God, I can't even stop shaking while I'm typing this. Then he looked at me. Fucking looked directly at me. His eyes. They were so far apart. They were almost on the sides of his head, which was oblong, like, I don't know, a sideways egg, but not that long. And he had a small nose in the center, absolutely hairless. No hair, just pale, dirty white skin, with crooked, jagged yellow teeth underneath a disgusting smile. I've seen a ton of creepypasta threads, and heard almost exact descriptions of ghouls, and I've wondered if maybe they saw who or what I saw, but it's never the same. He didn't leave me until the headlights of the school bus came over the hill. Then, without taking his eyes off me, he raised one hand and waved, but not like goodbye wave, more like a see you around wave. Then walked slowly away from the spot he stood for what felt like an eternity. When the bus pulled up, I was crying. I don't know why. I don't remember what triggered it, but the driver had to call the school, who called my mom, who came and picked me up. I tried telling her what I saw, but she didn't believe me. She said it was probably just a guy in a mask fucking with me. I knew it wasn't. I know it wasn't. Because for the next 5 years of my life, he was there, watching me, and almost enjoying our time together, like he was watching his favorite TV show. For the first few months, his appearance set me into a terrible frenzy of crying and screaming, and my mom, who was single most of my childhood, worked second and third shifts to keep our house. So she was never there at night or afternoon to watch me, so I never had anyone to tell. I was frightened and alone so much, but whenever I would see him, I would call my grandma and talk to her on the phone, hoping he would see this and think I was talking to the cops or something. I don't know. I was 12 or 13. I would shut the blinds and watch TV and try not to think about it. He would only make appearances like once a week, so it wasn't an everyday kind of thing. Then at some point, I remember that I realized he never came near me or touched me or anything. He just stood watching me, whether it be outside my windows or in the cornfield just beyond the fence to the playground at school. I remember I got used to him, and after a while it was nothing more than scenery. And when I would go on trips or vacations or something, he wasn't there. It was only around this small town. On one instance, when I was 15 or 16, I was on a walk with a friend of mine. We were walking near the edge of the town where the paved roads turn into gravel and the cemetery sits next to the graveyard, when I saw Skinwalker, as I had taken to calling him. He was about 100 yards away, leaning casually up against a gravestone. I asked my friend while keeping my eye on Skinwalker, "Want to go into the graveyard?" He was down, so we went in. It had become obvious to me that Skinwalker wasn't noticed by anyone other than myself, so it wasn't a shock that when I walked almost directly next to him, my buddy was oblivious. Shit, I remember that was the closest I'd ever seen him. He was so much more detailed this close. His skin, Christ, I'll never forget it. It was almost translucent. He wasn't just pale, he was old, and he was staring directly into my eyes. His eyes, they were green, not black, I remember. Green with a hint of yellow and brown. I remember he had pretty eyes, but they were so beady and far apart. I had forgotten all about my friend when he said, "Why are you staring at that gravestone?" I looked at him and then Skinwalker, but he wasn't there anymore, just an old weathered slab of tall concrete. I looked at it for a second, then noticed a name. Blank, blank. 1846 to 1874. I paid no attention to this for a long time until I noticed that every time I was in the graveyard, there he was, same pose, same stone, watching me. One day I was reading a book on the paranormal when I thought about something. Maybe he was just a ghost, and maybe he wanted me to help him. So I came up with a plan. Also, I forgot to add this. When I first started seeing him, my first thoughts were to hide. But then when I got used to him, I didn't want to take pictures. I was too frightened to imagine the outcome of photographing him. And yeah, I didn't have a phone until I was 16, and even then, it wasn't a camera phone. My mom had a camera, but it was pretty much off limits to me. We weren't well off on money, so things like that were kept out of my reach, so that's why I never took a picture. I rode my bike to the graveyard. I don't know why I rode my bike. At the time, I thought it might make a quicker getaway if he tried to get me or something. I don't know. Anyway, I approached him, standing there as usual, and I said, "Can you hear me?" He just looked, blank-faced. No? No response. "If you need my help, tell me." Then he seemed to get angry. I don't remember exactly what happened. All I remember was that I ran. I ran and I didn't look back until I was on my bike. And then when I got onto my bike, he was standing there, still at the gravestone with one arm stretched out towards me, like he was reaching for me to come back, or like he was sorry or something. I don't know. I didn't stick around much longer to find out. I rode as fast as I could home, and that was the last time I saw him for a while. A few months went by and I started to get really anxious, avoiding being alone, avoiding going outside after dark. I was so scared I would see him again. But at the same time, I felt bad, like I shouldn't have upset him. I felt sorry for him. I don't know, it's weird. But I felt like we were friends. I still feel like we're friends. The first time I saw him again was while I was riding the bus to school. I no longer had to walk to the bus stop, though. I was in high school, but I know it was him. He was walking, or dancing, down the sidewalk. But it was only a quick glance. He watched me go past him. I knew he knew that I was on. And that was it. His appearance became less and less frequent until one night, the last night I've ever seen him. I was 17 years old, and my mom announced we were moving. Things had gotten serious with her boyfriend, and we were moving in with him. Our boxes were being packed, and the house was on the market. It was about midnight, and I was alone in the house as usual. I was drawing in my living room. I had my supplies laid out in front of me, and I was going to town on the paper when I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. But this was a first. He was in my house. My first reaction was to scream. He took a step back. I remember this as being a strange moment. It was quiet, and he seemed scared. We watched each other for a moment, then I realized I had nothing to fear. and I went back to drawing. He moved about for a moment and wound up standing behind me. It was like he wanted to watch me draw. So I remember letting him. He moved himself in front of me. He stood there looking not at me, but my sketches. I'm not sure how long this lasted, but at some point I realized he must have wanted me to draw him. So I did. I started slowly, but eventually it was normal. I just sat completely silent drawing this being. This fucked up thing that followed me for damn near 5 years. And when I was done, I held my notebook up. He seemed to be happy. He seemed to be completely ecstatic. Actually, his smile seemed bigger, and his eyes seemed more kind. I'm pretty sure I smiled too. He liked it. I have absolutely no idea how long we stayed that way, but eventually he turned away from me and walked into the other room. And then, he was gone. Forever. My mom and I moved and went on with our lives. I'm 20 now and living on my own. And I wish with everything inside of me I didn't leave that notebook with my mother, because it's probably in storage somewhere now, and I wish I could show you guys the drawing. But it's not here at my apartment, so I did this for you all. His image forever burnt into my skull. I would also like to say this. Every year since I've moved, I go back to the gravestone and leave flowers. Every year, I've hoped to see him standing there, and I plan on doing this until I die. B living in a house with some other dudes. Basically nowhere. Outside of the city is just trees. It was particularly a harsh winter. However, this night isn't so bad. The power goes out. Are you afraid of the dark? Nickelodeon. I look outside of my enclosed porch to see if I'm the only one. The whole area is out. I forgot to mention that I'm a bit of a photography fag. This comes into play here. Well, there is nothing to do around here. I think to myself that I've never seen such a mass power outage like this before. This might be a cool time to do a little bit of photography. Step out the door, feeling more anxious than usual. Just calm down, dude. Don't let this get the best of you. Continue on and take some cool photographs of car light trails. Also make a light penis. Can't shake the feeling that something has been following me. Getting really nervous. It's too windy to listen around me. Let's call it a night. Head back to the house. Just one more picture. .exf. I take a pic of the house I live in. Feeling really on edge. Almost panicky. What the fuck is going on? I never let myself get this bad. Really feel like I'm not the only one out here. Inside, taking off boots and snow gear next to door. All of a sudden, something slams into the door. I shut myself right there, lock the door, and get back to my room. Lock myself in there, calm down enough to sleep. Next day I go through my pics. Light penis. Get to the pic of my house. Shit. This picture is fucking creepy as hell. Can't believe my house looks like such a nightmare. Wait a second. Shadow doesn't look right. Look closer. What the fuck is that? See what looks like some guy with a pig head staring right the fuck at me. I lose it. Ever since then, I've been hearing banging around my house, like a couple of times a week at night. Whatever the fuck that thing is, it wants in. And I'm losing sleep over this.